Welcome to Fairfield County Talks Housing One-on-One. I'm Evonne Klein, and I'll be your host today. We're sitting down with David Kooris, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Municipal Redevelopment Authority, commonly known as MRDA. Welcome, David. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you too.
It's great to see you in this new role. So we're just going to kick it off. If you could just tell us, what is the Connecticut Municipal Redevelopment Authority, or as I said, MRDA, and what's your role as Executive Director?
Sure. So first of all, thanks so much for having me here, and thanks for everything you do to advance sensible housing policy in the state. So the Municipal Redevelopment Authority, and I am the Executive Director, appointed in July of 2024, was launched by the Governor and the Connecticut General Assembly to provide assistance to municipalities to help them build housing in their train station areas and in their downtowns. And it's really based on the premise that there are a critical mass of municipalities, large and small, towns and cities, who do want to build housing in the places within their communities that make the most sense. But they may need technical expertise, they may need some additional staff capacity, and they may need resources. And so we were designed through state statute, originally written in 2019 and then amended in 2023 to provide that support.
Great. And what are you heading up really a new entity in the state, which clearly is critically important to the state of Connecticut. So as the Executive Director, what are your three priorities?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, it's going around speaking with chief elected officials, speaking with municipal planners and economic development professionals, speaking with developers, and understanding what it is that would really move the needle in different communities. And so really goal number one is just assessment, understanding the lay of the land and how communities differ and where we might be of greatest assistance. Goal number two, which is a close second, is getting municipalities to raise their hand and getting them to volunteer to welcome in our support. And the entire way this is structured is it's not a mandate. It's not, it doesn't overcome or usurp any local control. We have to be invited in. And so getting municipalities to raise their hand is crucially important, in the hopes that by this legislative session, by sometime in 2025, we can demonstrate that there is broad interest in this model. So we want to have communities of geographic range in all corners of the state. We want to have communities of different sizes, and we want to have communities with different types of development opportunities, so we can start to experiment and see the way in which this tool can be brought to bear for different challenges. And then ultimately, by the middle of 2025, we want to start putting money in projects and start delivering housing units. But as you know, housing development is a long process. And so as much as we're measuring our success on the number of units that we support, we're also measuring our success on the number of towns and cities that engage with us, because we think that there'll be a pronounced impact just by working with us and thinking through the way in which housing can fit into each community's vision for their future.
And are you encouraged? I mean, the Department of Housing has been in Connecticut for about 11 years now, which is a good thing, and hundreds of millions of dollars are sitting in the capital budget for housing. So are you encouraged by the pipeline we see of developers and projects that have really lined up to apply for money over the past several years?
Absolutely. Certainly encouraged by both the amount of resources that the state and the governor are dedicated to housing through Department of Housing and through CHAFA, and also the number of applicants. We're always going to be the small player in the room. We have $60 million in bond fund today. I suspect that'll be upped in the next legislative session for the coming 2 fiscal years. but we're always going to pale in comparison to those programs. Where I think, though, that we're a little bit different, and where I'm seeing maybe some different interest, is communities really like the idea that we're going to roll up our sleeves with them and focus at the neighborhood scale to try and help them think through the ways in which housing and economic development and traffic and tax base and environmental quality, the way in which all those things relate to one another in a comprehensive strategy. And they like the idea that, you know, they're not going to be submitting an application on a one-off for an individual project, but they're going to have a state entity holding hands with them around a district or neighborhood scale approach, because I think they're right that will help unlock future state funding if we understand the big picture of where the municipality is headed in their downtown and around their train station.
You know, as a former first selectman in Darien, I think paying attention to the neighborhoods and the neighborhood environment is critically important, and then pulling back and getting that larger picture of what a community can look like, be and aspire to, and how it all works together. Everything you have mentioned when you sit at a public hearing, these are the issues that come up, right? Our neighborhood, how will something fit into our neighborhood, the traffic. So I think, you know, being able to go hyper local and then pull back is critically important.
We very often have these discussions on a project by project basis, and it's difficult because you're in sort of the heat of the moment, and this single thing is you know, feels like it's out of context, even though it might be in accordance with zoning or in accordance with the plan of conservation and development. And I'm a strong believer that trying to pull that conversation back one step and have it around the future of a neighborhood or the future of a town without the specificity of a single project kind of there, you know, pointed at you, can really help to kind of cool down people's senses a little bit and focus the conversation on, you know, what do we really want to become as a community? What do we want to become as a state? Whereas it's really difficult to have those kind of big conversations when it's a project that's being proposed and is imminent.
Great. So I'd like to talk a little bit about your board. You have a board. And have they established goals for 2025? And if so, what are they?
Yes. So we are governed by a board, which is 16 individuals. We have 7 commissioners from the governor's cabinet, 3 gubernatorial appointees, and 6 legislative appointees. And they represent the public, private, and civic sectors, and a pretty good geographic range across the state. We've had a lot of conversations about, you know, what it is that we're trying to achieve, and thankfully the statute is broad enough that we now have the freedom to apply some specificity to that. I'd say a lot of the conversations at the board have been around the types of neighborhoods that we want to focus on. So by statute, certainly downtowns and transit-oriented communities. But there's been a lot of discussion around, well, what does it mean to be a downtown? And what if you're a community that may not have a downtown today, but has the zoning in place to create a downtown? And where we're sort of migrating as a board is we really just want to help communities achieve, you know, whatever they're trying to achieve, as long as it will result in a substantial increase in housing. And that substantial word has some ambiguity, which I think is purposeful. We will set criteria that we want to see, and the board is still in the process of doing that. But we also don't want to set an arbitrary threshold that discounts a lot of municipalities. We hope that there will be 100 or so municipalities that can work with us. And if they have a town center or a village center or a hamlet or a major downtown, whatever the right amount of housing is for that community, we want to help them achieve it. So in an urban downtown, it'll be thousands of units. In a town center, it would likely be hundreds. But in a small community, even several dozen units where there aren't any today, in a walkable area, maybe near a bus line, maybe near some employment, can really make a huge difference. So it's a long way of saying we're still sort of working through those concrete goals, but right now, getting municipalities to sign up, and we've set a soft target of, let me take a step back. When we started talking at the onset of this entity in July and August of 2024, I said I'd be happy if we had 2 or 3 municipalities raising their hand by the end of the year. We've now adjusted that to like 15 to 20 municipalities based on the response that we've seen. So that's our first goal, is getting municipalities to initiate the process in late 24 or early 25. And the way in which they do so is by passing a resolution by the local legislative body saying that they want to work with us. And as I said earlier, that invites us in the door. Then we can roll up our sleeves together. Then we can start digging in on zoning, which I know we'll talk about in a minute. We can start digging in on the boundaries of a development district and both say, this is the area we're focusing on together. But also, because of community concern around density and development, it'll also make clear the areas that we're not working on together. Our mission is not to come in to every single neighborhood in the state. Our mission is to help municipalities in their downtowns, in their walkable centers, around their bus or rail stations. And so I think through that process of working with a municipality, we will both identify where we're not working as well as where we are working. And then I think we can have a real pronounced impact. But back to the fundamental question about goals, first and foremost, 15 to 20 municipalities signed up. And then the other major goal, which I know we'll talk about in a minute too, is just getting up and running. Starting a new authority from scratch has a lot of logistical details that need to be in place. And so we've spent a lot of time on policies and procedures and procurement. And we're making, what I know from being inside government is rapid headway, but it takes time. It takes time to get those components in place.
Great, thank you. So how, you're talking about pulling in the mayors and first selectmen in Connecticut to MRDA. So, and you've really, you're talking about how you could be most helpful. But, we're focused here in Fairfield County. And depending on the municipality, you see different things happening, right? So in Darien, we have quite a bit of development going on. Whether it's redoing single family homes, that's happening in in almost all of our neighborhoods in town. We have a number of mixed use projects, so commercial and housing projects under construction, and we have some new applications in. So can you talk a little bit about MRDA and Fairfield County? Because there is quite a bit of development. We see it in Fairfield. There have been a number of applications in Fairfield, Greenwich with varying degrees of success, and New Canaan. And of course, I'm not really talking about the cities here because the cities seem to be, continuing at a pace to develop housing of all kinds and for people of all incomes. Absolutely. We often have challenges, it's no secret, in our suburban municipalities. So let's talk a little bit about Fairfield County, what you're seeing, how you could be most helpful here. I mean, you've really painted a great picture, but we have very specific challenges here. How can you help us here?
Yeah, absolutely. County? So I think with Fairfield County, we've already had some conversations with several municipalities, mostly along the New Haven line, towns, who have either already put zoning in place, like in Darien or Fairfield, or who are considering transit-oriented development zoning or transit-oriented communities like Westport. And I've been encouraged. They seem to be very welcoming of this approach, which is, reliant on carrots rather than sticks and bringing in technical expertise and capacity as well as resources. They're interested in the fact that unlike some other state programs, which are more targeted towards underserved communities or communities with certain demographic characteristics, this is a program that could be invested in any municipality, regardless of their socioeconomic status. And so they see this as an opportunity to get some grant or loan funds from the state that they might not have in other programs. That said, not surprisingly, they're also hesitant. And what I hear consistently from some of the more, some of the wealthier and the more suburban towns is, we're very interested in this, but we're not going to be first. We do want to see kind of how it plays out. There's a lot of, there's an expectation that when the state comes in a way like this, that we are going to be dictatorial and we're going to have a set way that we will mandate that they perform. And so while it's very clear that we are not structured that way, and the statute, codifies that, they're still a little bit skeptical that by inviting us in, there won't be a second shoe that drops down the road. And so we're having those conversations. I'm very encouraged in Fairfield in particular, because I think there's a lot of interest there. I think there are big opportunities, for a town like Darien. The beauty of this is when we come in, we look at your zoning, and we do have to certify that your zoning will result in a substantial increase in housing units. But for a town like Darien that's already made a lot of those decisions, particularly around Norotan, around Norotan Heights in downtown, we likely wouldn't ask you to do much more than that. We would come in, we would say, you're already doing what you need to through zoning in these targeted geographies within your municipality. And so we can come in and support in terms of what exactly we could do for towns in Fairfield County. We can support infrastructure, or we can provide low interest loans. And so, or grants to projects. But for the housing project, if the town wants to leverage a little bit more affordability, or wants something that the development may not be able to support on its own economics, we can help in that way. Or if there's infrastructure, we talked earlier about sort of looking comprehensively at these neighborhoods and what the effects of development will be, which are real, and we have to acknowledge them. Maybe there's a sidewalk connection, or maybe there's an intersection reconfiguration, or maybe there's a greenway, or maybe there's a pedestrian bridge that would minimize the impact of that development, but the development can't fund it on its own. That's a place where an entity like Municipal Redevelopment Authority could come in and say, okay, working in conjunction with Town A in Fairfield County, you're willing to accept this development, but you recognize that there needs to be a commensurate infrastructure investment. We can support that so that the town gets an enhanced quality of life concurrent with that new private investment.
And that's, you bring up the infrastructure piece. Oftentimes, that's what we hear.
Yes.
The town can't support this project because we don't have the necessary infrastructure.
Yes.
So, no pun intended, but by building that bridge
Absolutely.
between development and infrastructure is critically important. So you've talked about the feedback that you're hearing. We're hearing a lot of excitement on the ground. Those of us who, have a keen interest in developing housing and ensuring that municipalities have zoning that supports housing. Anything else you're hearing on the ground about MRDA?
Yeah, so I think on the zoning piece in particular, I have been very encouraged by the number of municipalities who have said, we think we got the zoning right in this area, and so let's start working together there. But once you're here and investing in projects, we'd really love your help to think through how we could redo our zoning over here as well. And so very oftentimes a town has maybe through a state grant, maybe through their own initiative, hired a consultant, done the zoning in a very localized area, and are starting to see the success for that, but they don't have the internal capacity or expertise to then start to replicate that or expand it elsewhere in their community. And having a resource that can do that is very interesting to them. The other piece that we keep hearing is around marketing. There's a lot of municipalities. This is probably less of an issue for Fairfield County, certainly Western Fairfield County, but definitely Eastern Fairfield County. You hear from a lot of communities, we've done the zoning, we have the sites, but we're not seeing the developer interest. And we're hopeful that on our websites, on our materials, maybe a developer will come to us because they're looking for an opportunity in Norwalk, but then we'll learn about an opportunity in Bethel or an opportunity in Stratford that they might not have sought out on their own. But we can package those opportunities in a way that maybe will get interest where it doesn't previously exist. The other piece that frankly I'm perhaps most excited about of what I think we can achieve that has seen a lot of municipal interest is trying to proactively navigate these development districts through as much of the state regulatory process as is practical. Instead of having projects as challenging as zoning is, they oftentimes then have to go through an approval process at the state, whether it's through DOT and the Office of State Traffic Administration, or through DEEP related to stormwater management or flood management, or through DECD related to historic preservation. And so as much as possible, when we work with a municipality in a specific neighborhood and they have their zoning in place, we want to then do some of that state permitting proactively and conceptually before we have an individual developer. And in doing so, I think we can significantly shorten the timeline and the cost of development, lowering the rent and increasing affordability for everybody.
Right. And that's key. We hear that from developers here. They were stuck in the state waiting for approvals, and the costs went up and the timeline got longer. So that's really key and important. So how do you see yourself? I want to skip ahead to the legislative session starting in January. What role do you see MRDA playing, and possibly yourself, during this legislative session, if any?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that I think about a lot, and it's one that I'm not sure I have a great answer for yet. We're going to have some minor legislative tweaks, right? Now that the bill is enacted and we're out talking to municipalities, there's some little things that we will do within our own governing statute, or aim to do within our own governing statute, to try and make it easier. Beyond that, I know that a lot of the proposals that have been in the works, whether it's Work, Live, Ride, or Fair Share, or other ideas that I'm sure we haven't even heard about yet, will come up. Frankly, I'm going to probably do my best to stay out of it to a degree, but will be hopefully a resource to folks who have questions about, how might this relate to what you're doing, or how might this relate to municipalities. Perhaps we will have had some of those on the ground conversations with municipal officials that can be advantageous to folks who are working through those legislative proposals. But I think, first and foremost, my fundamental answer is it's not an either or, right? For anyone who's working through any statewide concept, I don't want to give them the opportunity to point to MRDA and say, well, we're doing that, so we don't have to do anything else. All of these things have the potential to be complementary if structured appropriately and if thought through. No one said, well, we don't need MRDA because we have the Department of Housing, right? There are different niches within which each of these programs or policies are going to act. And so I think more than anything else, I'll probably be answering questions and explaining what MRDA does or does not do, and that we are not a fig leaf for inaction.
Great. Well, and I think it's really important to have you and MRDA as a resource for legislators. so that, during the session, things are, housing, zoning proposal, any proposal is complex, right?
Absolutely.
And there's a lot going at legislators, right? It's a very busy time up in Hartford, and so much is happening. So to have additional resources and folks who really understand these issues are really critical to the legislators and to the whole process. So if you had a magic wand,
yep,
and you could wave it, have you thought about, 5 years out, 10 years out, what can Connecticut, I guess the question would be, what would Connecticut be? What would Connecticut look like after you wave that magic wand?
Yeah, certainly thought about it. One of the first things that we're going to do is, using our consultants, try and get a better understanding of the development potential around the state's rail system, bus rapid transit system, and in our downtowns. There's a lot of talk around the supply deficit within the state and the number of housing units that we need at various, income levels or rent levels and purchase levels. We don't really have a good sense of how many of those units we can realistically fit in different places. So first and foremost, I don't think we'll realistically have it for this legislative session, but perhaps for the next, in 2026 or late 2025, I want to be able to say, based on MRDA's analysis, we can accommodate 30,000 units or whatever the number is in our walkable downtowns around our transit stations. Then, zooming forward 5 to 10 years, I hope that we realize a good chunk of that potential. The way that I have been talking about the opportunity and the way in which I've discussed it with the governor is, if you isolate the areas that we are prioritized to work in, whether it's the station areas or the downtowns, across the state of Connecticut, that adds up to about 1% of the land area of the entire state. And on the one hand, it's nothing in terms of acreage when you look at the entire landscape. On the other hand, if we can maximize the potential of that 1%, we can pretty significantly transform the state, both in terms of the broad housing supply by creating, many more units at different income levels, but also by making the state less car dependent, more transit oriented, more walkable, by reinforcing our downtowns, by bringing life to vacant storefronts. That 1% can really be transformative. And so out 5 to 10 years, I hope that sort of starts to play out and we see action in enough of those station areas and downtowns that the whole starts to add up to greater than just the sum of the parts. I think a big piece of that is the relationship with the Department of Transportation. We have the commissioner and deputy commissioner on our board. We've had a lot of conversations around the opportunities that exist around the system. And as we see, changing in commuting patterns, more work from home, less going into the city or into Stamford or to New Haven 5 days a week, that creates an opportunity because we don't maybe have as much need for the surface parking lots and the parking resources. Maybe we can do more economic development on Department of Transportation land, which in itself will feed ridership because people are traveling between Connecticut towns and cities using the rail and the bus system. And so I think over the 10-year horizon, seeing a bit of a transition from viewing the stations as park and rides to viewing the stations as anchors of neighborhood and community revitalization, development, and quality of life.
Great, thank you. And I want to thank you, David Kooris, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Municipal Redevelopment Authority, for joining us today. It's been a very informative conversation, and I'd like to thank our audience for joining us as well. Please keep a lookout for our next Brown Bag Luncheon, which will be January 15th, for a preview of the legislative session. Thank you again.